What's up, Whoppers? It's Mr. Hill, and we're going to talk about Unit 2. We're going to do this in two parts, of course, and Unit 2 is actually quite a bit shorter than Part 1, than Unit 1. So I think that you guys will find that it's actually quite simple, and in fact, it's the exact same time period of Unit 1. And so, really when we talk about reviewing for the AP test, we really shouldn't be thinking in units. We really should be thinking in time periods because when you get a question on the AP test, it's not going to be a question of what unit is this. It's going to be a question of what time period is this and what's going on in those time periods. And so the themes that are going on in Unit 2 are the same ones that are going on in Unit 1. And so this is the Unit 1 and 2 time period, which is circa 1200 to 1450. And we've really got four major things that are going on. One is the Indian Ocean trade is becoming the biggest trade route, trade network in the world, and it's connecting many different civilizations together. The civilizations in the Middle East, the civilizations in Eastern Africa, in China, in India, and in Southeast Asia as well. We also see during this time period that Europe starts to come back into the trade networks after the Crusades and after the development of all of these goods that many crusaders developed a liking for. Another big thing that's going on in the time period is the spread of Islam, and Islam is spreading really in every direction, through every way. It's especially spreading across the trans-Saharan trade into northern Africa, but of course also in the Indian Ocean, as well as the land-based Silk Roads, which were also reinvigorated during this time period. So lots of discussion on trade, guys, and I really kind of want to point out as we go through and talk about trade through this course and as we review. This unit is really all about those three special trade networks: the land-based Silk Road trade, the Indian Ocean-based Silk Road trade, and then the trans-Saharan trade networks. So when we talk about this unit, those three trade networks are going on. When we talk about our next unit of study, when we talk about 1450 to 1750, it's all about the Atlantic Ocean trade. We've now found the Americas, and that's where most of the goods in the world are going through. And so that's a really big distinction to understand. If you get a question on the AP test from this time period, you're thinking land-based Silk Road trade, Indian Ocean Silk Road trade, and the trans-Saharan trade networks. What's being traded? Largely the same things that are always being traded, but what especially is being exchanged in this time period, Islam, because Islam's a relatively new religion and it's making its way to new portions of the world. We talked about Western Europe remaining feudalistic and Japan remaining feudalistic. We'll talk about the Mongols in Unit 2, Part 2, which I always enjoy. I hope you do too. All right, guys, so let's talk about trade before this time period. There was always land-based trade, all the way back from the Roman Empire to the Han Dynasty in China. So we did have land-based trade for millennia before we get into this time period. But when the classical empires of the classical age fell apart, like the Roman dynasty, like the Han dynasty, like the Gupta in India, the land-based Silk Road trade especially really fell apart. We know that Western Europe fell into feudalism, and with that, we didn't have lots of international trade. That is going to change, and the biggest reasons why that's going to change is because of these new Arab merchants in the Middle East. Now we have this Abbasid Empire, the Abbasid Caliphate, if you will, that has all these merchants. And why, of course, do they have all these merchants? Because Muhammad was a merchant. It's a glorified profession. And because how much wealth can be attained from trade, especially with the gold from the trans-Saharan trade, the gold that's coming out of Western Africa. Now we have Europe re-entering the exchange system after the Crusades. Everybody wants goods from China. We have desired goods all throughout these trade networks. We have desired goods all the way over in Western Africa. We have desired goods all the way over in East Asia. So lots of goods anywhere you go. And we're going to find that in order to get those highly desired goods, that each region is going to specialize in goods that the other regions don't have. And they're going to try to capitalize on these special goods in order to get the highly coveted goods from somewhere else. China, for instance, has this large desire for European gold and silver, which the Europeans are especially getting from Western Africa. It's important to note that we don't have merchants that are going from Europe and they are traveling all the way across the land-based Silk Roads to China. That's not really the case, guys. Our merchants are going to travel about halfway, and they're going to land somewhere in the Middle East or perhaps make their way all the way over to India, and then they're going to exchange with merchants from China. We're not going to see a merchant travel all the way over to China, and that's why it's so important that these two areas in the middle are such major trade networks. One of which would be in the Middle East with the Abbasid Caliphate. The other one would be down in India. Okay. China is a big factor in increasing trade in this time period. Lots of goods are coveted from China. The compass, paper, gunpowder, all of these are innovations that are adding to the desire for Chinese goods, which there already was a high desire for Chinese goods because they have those luxury items like porcelain, like silk, right? All these things. Now, the Chinese merchants wanted goods from everywhere. They wanted that gold and silver from Europe or Africa, but they also wanted the precious stones of South Asia, which is India, or horses, especially coming out of the Middle East. Okay, so we see lots of innovations that are going to encourage trade in this time period. Land-based travel, caravans, so people traveling together to avoid being attacked by robber barons, by gangs along the Silk Roads. We also see, of course, the camel saddles, especially used in the trans-Saharan trade, but also in the land-based Silk Road. We also have those sea-based inventions, the magnetic compass, the stern rudder, and the junk ship, all of which are helping trade along the Indian Ocean sea routes. Okay, both in Africa, in the Sahara Desert, and along the Silk Road, when we get, let's say, coming out of China in the Gobi Desert, you have lots of deserts that are coming across the land-based Silk Road trade. And how are merchants going through all of these deserts? Of course, they're using camels, they're using camel saddles, but they also need to be able to stop some places to get a drink themselves and to get a drink for their animals, all these things. That's where we're going to see oases merge. And this is going to check a lot of boxes for the College Board, guys, because this is human beings interacting with the environment, which is one of the themes of the class. And it also is trade and cultural trade and all these things. So one important trading city to remember is Kashgar. Kashgar is in northern China, so it's in a mountainous pass. You can actually see it on the map right here, coming out of the Gobi Desert. But this is a very important trading city along the land-based Silk Roads because we have rivers converging there, and an oasis is a fertile spot in the desert where water is found. And that's going to lead people to stop in this oasis and interact and trade. And of course, there is evidence that there was cultural exchange in Kashgar because it started off as a Buddhist city and later became a Muslim city, so later became a center of Islamic worship. It's nice to have that evidence of cultural exchange. In case you get a question on cultural exchange, you can talk about Kashgar along the land-based Silk Roads. I'm not in presentation mode. That's embarrassing. Here we go. Okay, so the caravanserai, another innovation, another thing that developed along the land-based Silk Roads. And these are just inns, and they're coming from the Persian word caravan because we have lots of merchants that are traveling in caravans along the land-based Silk Roads. And they sprang up 100 miles apart from each other. And the reason why they're 100 miles apart is because camels can travel about 100 miles without needing any more water. And this is a place where merchants would come in, they would get a rest, they would give their animals a rest, or they could trade for a new animal if their animal was sickly or injured to continue along the Silk Road. So another innovation that you could use. China continues to lead the world in innovations in this time period. China has all of these wonderful inventions for sea trade, like the compass, the stern rudder. They also are going to revolutionize trade within their own state because they're going to develop flying cash. Previously, really anywhere around the world, you either have bartering, where you're exchanging one good for another good, or you're trading with gold or silver. That's really the way in which things were traded in this time period. But China really starts that out. China becomes the first money economy where they're using copper coins, but copper coins become immensely, immensely heavy. If you're a merchant and you're traveling over long distances, even if you're just traveling through China, you're traveling 1,000 miles from northern China to southern China. It's a lot to cover, especially if you're doing lots of trade, you're getting lots of copper coins. And so a way in which an innovation helps merchants trade is by developing flying cash. And flying cash is essentially what you would consider today to be paper currency. It was really a receipt. And what you would do as a merchant is you would go anywhere in the state, anywhere in China, and you would deposit your copper coins and you would get these receipts, this flying cash. And that would be a promise that if you came back to a bank anywhere in China, that you could exchange those copper coins, that flying cash for copper coins. And so this thus establishes and creates paper currency for the first time. And so flying cash becomes just as important, just as expensive, as precious as the copper coins themselves. And so this is going to encourage trade in China, another wonderful innovation that's going to encourage trade. And more importantly, it's going to establish paper currency as a real thing throughout the world. And we see Europe is going to follow their lead. They're going to create banking houses, which is going to become the modern bank. And they use a bill of exchange, which is essentially paper currency or flying cash. All right, moving on to the next one. My dog has attacked me. Crash, stop, leave me alone. Okay. Indian Ocean trade. Okay, so what are the basics of Indian Ocean trade? Why is it called the Indian Ocean trade? It's all around India. That's the center of the Indian Ocean trade. And we're really talking about Arab merchants coming over from Arabia, from of course, the Holy Land of Mecca, and they're stopping in India, especially Western India over here, like Calicut, for instance, and they are exchanging for goods that are coming over from especially China, East Asia, and Southeast Asia. We also have involved in this trade network Eastern Africa. So we have pretty much every area of the world that is involved in this trade. How does Europe get involved in this trade? They come through the Mediterranean over here, and they will trade, with Muslim merchants in Arabia. So everybody is involved in this. And the Indian Ocean trade is especially going to take off in this time period because our Muslim merchants are such great seafarers. They are going to be the ones that start to notice the monsoon winds and start to utilize the monsoon winds to go from Eastern Africa to India and all the way to China. And that, of course, as I said, Muslim Persians and Arabs, the dominant seafarers, they're going to make their way to the west coast of India. The best example is Calicut. And I know we've done this slide before, but there are some of those cities that you just have to remember because they're so important pieces of evidence. Calicut is really important, looking for those goods from India like pepper. Also down at the bottom, remember, this is kind of our first example of state-sponsored trade. While Calicut isn't a state, it's a city. The local rulers are gonna allow free trade. They're gonna allow for foreign merchants to come in because it's so beneficial to their city, bringing all of these wealthy goods to their city. Now, Indian Ocean trade leads to specialization, and these goods are goods that you have to remember. But the good news is that these goods are the same goods that are traded in this course throughout history. These are the goods that are native to these respective places, and therefore they're always going to be the most coveted items from these respective places. In India, for instance, it's all about woven goods, cotton, carpets, also, of course, pepper, one of the many coveted spices. It's worth noting and a reminder, guys, that in this time period, India is immensely, immensely wealthy. And notice what their most coveted goods are: woven fabrics, finished textiles, which, of course, is the best example of a complete transformation when English imperialism changes the Indian economy after the British East India Company and then the British Raj. Of course, that's much later on in the course. Malaysia and Indonesia, which is down in Southeast Asia, that's, of course, the Spice Island spices. The Swahili coastal states down in Eastern Africa, that's all about gold, slaves, ivory. China has always been silk and porcelain. And then the Middle East, horses, figs, and dates, but especially horses. The Indian Ocean slave trade, another really important one for us to remember, guys, because we should be able to juxtapose, to compare Indian Ocean slave trade with Atlantic Ocean slave trade. Of course, we don't have Atlantic Ocean slave trade yet because we don't have Columbus. That will be between 1450 and 1750, our next time period. Right now, it's all about Indian Ocean slave trade. And Indian Ocean slave trade is considerably better for the people traded as far as what their lives are going to be like once they're traded. Where are slaves coming from? They're coming from Eastern Africa. And as a reminder, guys, slavery has existed in Africa since the very, very beginning of recorded time, because our Bantu speakers would keep slaves as a form of wealth, as they did not hold property as a form of wealth. So slaves traded in the Indian Ocean, they're largely going to be coming to the Middle East, or they may come to India, but they're especially coming to the Middle East. They're going to live very, very different lives than slaves traded in the Atlantic Ocean. They're going to be living in seaports. They'll be sailors or soldiers, or they'll be living in the households of their owners. They're going to work alongside free laborers, and so they're not going to have that hard plantation agriculture that you would see out in the Atlantic Ocean. Remember that any time that you have a diaspora, a shifting of lots of people from one place to another, they're going to bring their culture with them. That, of course, is true with Indian Ocean trade. Our African musical styles and customs are going to come from Eastern Africa to all these places throughout the Middle East and the Indian Ocean. The monsoon winds, I know you guys know this stuff, but it's, we'll keep reviewing it because, the College Board loves this stuff. Key to trade in the Indian Ocean. And the biggest reason why the College Board loves this, because it encourages trade, and it also encourages cultural diffusion and religious diffusion. Diffusion is the idea of one culture going from one place to the other place. Why does that occur? Because our Muslim merchants especially are having to stay in one place for long periods of time until the wind changes. And because of this, they're going to settle down. They're perhaps meet a wife. They're going to mingle with the people that are there, and then they're going to form a family. And when they do so, often those families were raised Muslim. The other key innovations in the time period, the trading ship, the doughs were used. These are these thin trading ships. No need to have any sort of military capacities because there is free trade in the Indian Ocean because everybody is benefiting. You have that lateen sail, the triangular sail that catches wind from multiple directions, the stern rudder in the back that allows you to change and shift the direction of the ship, and the astrolabe, which is for navigation. It lines up with the horizon and allows you to use the stars to know your location in a given place. Okay, Malacca. This is an important one, guys, because Malacca is a very, very coveted trading area. This, of course, is the Straits of Malacca that passes through Southeast Asia. And we've already covered 3 different states in this exact location. It is important that we're able to trace the religion of these states because it shows the cultural diffusion going on between merchants going through this heavily traveled route. At first, it's the Srivijaya kingdom that was there. They were Hindu. because Hindus are oldest religion and our oldest merchants passing through this area. Once Buddhism comes around, then we'll have a kingdom, the Majapahit kingdom, which was Buddhist. And then now we have our Muslim merchants coming in. They established the Sultanate of Malacca, and Malacca is a wealthy Muslim city-state. Just as all the kingdoms before it, they're going to collect fees on ships that pass through the area that makes them very rich and powerful. They are finally going to be conquered by the Portuguese, who we remember are our first Europeans that travel around the Cape of Good Hope and make it into the Indian Ocean. And our Portuguese will establish control of the Indian Ocean. And of course, then it's going to shift again and become a highly Catholic area. Zhang He's voyages, yes. Very important historically, guys, Zhang He's voyages. Not so much because of the initial impact of the voyages, more so the long-term impact of the voyages. Our Chinese are the most technologically advanced between circa 1200 to 1450. They are by far the best as far as their ships. They have these large dragon ships, they're called, and the large junk ships as well that are much bigger and more advanced, that can carry lots of goods, they can carry lots of food, they can carry horses with them, and they can travel, look, as far as Eastern Africa. They traveled all the way about 4,000 miles over to Eastern Africa. Why did these initial voyages take place? Zhang He was sent by the Ming Emperor to show the rest of the world the power of the Ming Dynasty. And they're looking actually to fund more tributary states. They want more tribute being paid to China. And that's exactly what the initial purpose is. And in the short term, that's going to be immensely successful. These large Chinese ships are going to arrive. People are saying, wow, look how powerful China is, the Ming Dynasty is. We want to be able to trade with China. And so it's going to open up new markets for Chinese goods. Zhang He's going to bring back all of these exotic treasures, like exotic animals, like the giraffe, very famously, back to China. And China's going to get a better understanding of the outside world. But the biggest effects of Zhang He's voyages are going to be the long-term effects. The scholar gentry does not like the fact that all of these outside goods and outside ideas are being brought back to China by Zhang He. And that has to do with our understanding of Confucianism. Confucianism is all about honoring tradition. It's all about honoring your ancestors and how things have been done for thousands of years. And so now bringing in all of these foreign goods, these foreign ideas, this is a threat to the very way of life of China. And Confucianism, of course, is heavily embedded in the most influential class in China, the scholar gentry. The scholar gentry, they work for the government. They're the most respected. They're supposed to be the smartest and the brightest of China because they are that 1% that have passed the civil service exam. And they're the ones that are going to shut down these voyages. They're going to say, no, we should not be going out and trading with these other civilizations. And so the scholar gentry are going to get in the ear of the emperor, and the emperor is going to discourage sailing away from China. And this is going to be the start of Chinese isolation. And this is a very, very important time that China is going into isolation, because here we are, guys, our Zhang He's voyages, look at this time period, 1405 to 1433. That is right before, just years before, the Portuguese start exploring and start the age of exploration, and to start making its way around Africa. And then, of course, Columbus finding the New World. The Chinese go into isolation right before these new lands are discovered in the New World. China absolutely had the capacity to go over and form empires in the New World, and they didn't do it. They sank into isolation, especially because of Zhang He's voyages. So a really, really important world event with Zhang He's voyages and the long-term effects of them. Okay, and on to our last trade network. We are getting into the Sahara Desert. And the Sahara is a massive, massive desert. It's 3.6 million square miles, the size of China. and it's very difficult to live in the Sahara Desert. And we do have our Hausa kingdoms. You can see Mali over here. That is where people living in the Sahara Desert, and they're only able to do that because of oases, mostly environmental oases with rivers that are passing through. We have the Senegal River over in Western Africa that has lots of gold, which of course is the big draw to Western Africa and the Hausa kingdoms. But we also have man-made oases with people digging wells to be able to have water from the ground and then being able to support agriculture. And our Muslim merchants are going to be the first that come through the Sahara Desert looking to trade with our Hausa kingdoms. To the west, of course, our camels are going to be key in this. We've talked about the camels many times in this class, but they're coming over from Arabia, and they adapt to the environment. They are perfect animals for this type of trade because they can hold more water than horses, because they can eat those spiny plants like cactus. They can go 100 miles without needing a new drink. And so that is hugely important to trade in the Sahara Desert. We also see adapting to the environment with our camel saddles, 15 different types of camel saddles. We did have a battle saddle, which I love, riding very high on the hump that allowed them to see the battlefield. But the most important saddle was developed by the Somalis in Eastern Africa because it allowed camels to carry up to 600 pounds. And that allowed massive amounts of goods being brought to and from Western Africa, which was key for trans-Saharan trade, bringing back all of that gold and bringing in countless items coveted in West Africa, especially salt. Okay, trans-Saharan trade. Again, it's all about that gold in Western Africa, especially along the Senegal River. They also came for ivory and slaves. What are our West Africans trading for? Salt, textiles from India, paper, and horses. Ghana and Mali become our two big kingdoms. Ghana is first, and then comes Mali. Mali, we have those two leaders that we have to remember. First is Sunjata. You guys know the story. We covered this in Unit 1. This is his father ruled over Western Africa. Then his enemies came in. They invaded. They killed his father. They killed his mother. They killed the whole royal family. But because he was a cripple, he had kind of a back injury. He was sort of a hunchback. They let him live. And that was a huge mistake because despite his injury, he went into training, became a fearsome warrior, and then he returned, defeated his enemies, and established the Malian kingdom. He also is going to establish important trade relationships with merchants from the Middle East and create a thriving gold trade. And the biggest beneficiary of that thriving gold trade, of course, was Mansa Musa. How is Mali so successful? Taxing all the trade in and through the area. And guys, that is uniform with our kingdoms in Africa that we cover, meaning you always know that the powerful kingdoms in Africa in this time period became powerful because of gold trade and because of taxing trade in their area. Ghana, Mali, and Zimbabwe down in Eastern Africa all did this and all became very successful by doing this. Also, because of the presence of Muslim merchants, these become religious centers of Islam. Timbuktu, especially because when Mansa Musa came back from his pilgrimage, he brought with him Islam and a devoted respect to increasing Islam in this area. We all know about his extravagant pilgrimage, but don't forget about when he comes back, increasing the support of Islam in Mali. He's going to establish religious schools in Timbuktu, build mosques, right? And many West Africans eventually will convert to Islam. It's a predominantly Islamic location today. The last slide, actually, we're a pretty quick one today, guys, getting through the trade networks because so much of it is review, is Ibn Battuta. Ibn Battuta is our Marco Polo of the Middle East. He's a Muslim Berber explorer and scholar, meaning he's coming from Northern Africa. That's what a Berber is. Obviously, Muslim means he's of the Islamic faith, and he's going to largely travel through the Muslim world. He is going to visit predominantly Muslim places, and part of this was a spiritual journey for him to get to better understand the religion. So his writings often are going to have that bias, that religious bias of him writing about his own faith and glorifying Muslim states throughout his travels. Something, of course, to remember if we ever get a document by Ibn Battuta. His work, in which he writes about all the places that he travels to, is called A Gift to Those Who Contemplate the Wonders of Cities and Marvels of Traveling. Nice long name for you. All right, and so our practice SAQ, as I move myself so you guys can see this, identify one innovation that increased trade to or with China. So I leave that kind of open-ended to you guys, to or with China. And so that could be, merchants coming over and trading from other states, or this could be within China. Perhaps there's an innovation that helps trade within China. B, identify one specific city or state in Asia that became a majority Muslim location due to the high volume of Muslim merchants who passed through it. So there's a couple of locations in this time period that, because of all of the Muslim merchants that passed through it or around it, the area became gradually a Muslim location. Give me an example of that. And then C, very specific down at the bottom, one way that slaves traded in the Indian Ocean in this time period lived different lives than the slaves traded in the Atlantic Ocean in our next time period. All right, guys, nice quick screencast for you guys. The next one, part 2, will be a little bit longer because there's a lot on the Mongols. But enjoy the short one for now. Do that SAQ, and I'll talk to you guys soon.